Hey guys, what's up? This is Meathead Mikkel from meatheadgaming.com, and today I want to switch gears a little bit and I want to talk about Paragon point stat allocation. And this isn't going to be like a super advanced video. Some of the more advanced players kind of know some of these things, but a lot of, I would say, even intermediate players don't. And some of the caveats I kind of found out recently myself. What I want to talk about is, where you would generally want to put your Paragon points first, kind of based around what build you're using or what class you're using, and how some of those Paragon points affect your overall, you know, gameplay beyond just the obvious. So, because some of them actually have kind of like interesting uh, mechanics when you combine them with other items or skills and things like that. So, first things first, I'm a level 381, which it's a decently high level. There aren't that many players that are in the upper 300s. A lot of players are in the 300s, but the general population is still 200 and below. Most people who play the game, even like a light amount, should be above Paragon 100. The first 100 levels are incredibly easy to get. If you watched any of my videos doing Coda runs, you can do them on whatever tournament level is comfortable for you, and you can get a lot of XP very quickly. So no reason not to be at least 100. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about all the different points. So we'll start with the utility tab and kind of work our way backwards. So where are you going to want to put your points here first? Good question. Gold find is going to be absolutely last, and the reason for that is because this gold find percentage is additive. It's not multiplicative in any way. So regardless of difficulty, it's going to add, a flat 50%. So if I look at like on tournament 6, I got some gold find on some piece of gear, but it's basically 1600%. Well, if I max this out, it's going to be 1676. So it just adds 50% gold find, which is useless. I think this might be not a placeholder, but I think this is something that Blizzard is going to change because this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And this either needs to be buffed to a higher flat amount or it needs to be multiplicative. Like let's say, maybe half a percentage per point, so you would end up with 25% gold find, but it would be multiplicative. So like on tournament 6, instead of making 1600, you'd make 2000 if you max this. And that would actually, if you scaled this, then maybe this would be somewhat useful, but even when you compare it to these other stats, this is going to be absolute last. So, number 4, right? Then area damage, regardless of where you choose to put your stat points first, for most people, it's not going to be an area damage first. This is going to be a second or third place that you put your stats, but you're going to want at least 1% here. And the reason for that is because, even though Blizzard did explain how area damage works, it's a flat 20% chance to do some amount of damage. So, I have, what's my area damage at? It's like at 1% right now. So all attacks have a 20% chance to deal 1% of damage in a 10-yard radius. That sounds really simple, but it actually raises a lot of questions, none of which we have answers to. How does this work with AoE spells? How does this work with spells that tick really fast? Spells like Archon, like the Archon Beam or Disintegrate Wave or Ray of Frost for Wizard, they all have kind of internal tick rates that are, tied into your attacks per second, but they actually attack very fast. So how does that interaction work? How does it work with, can area damage proc off of like pet attacks or like we just don't know a lot of how area damage works. So because of that, if you just want, but it does work, we know that. And if you're just looking for more damage and you don't need both of these right here, you don't need resource cost reduction and life on hit maxed first, then go ahead and definitely put your points in here, but put at least one, because because we don't know exactly how it works, area damage might actually even proc certain effects or certain things. Like I don't know if it procs life on hit or not. It may or may not, but it doesn't hurt to have 1%, especially if you don't have any on your gear. because that way whatever procs may happen, they're still going to happen 20% of the time, and at least they'll happen. So definitely put at least 1 point in here. Which brings us to resource cost reduction and life on hit. So, with lifesteal now out of the picture, as of today, auction house is closed, so no more lifesteal for those of you who are going to be playing up to level 70. This is going to be huge. Plain and simple, you need sustain. And resource cost reduction and life on hit, you're going to have to kind of figure out which one you want to max first. I mean, 10% is pretty decent, and if you have this roll on some of your items and you get your total resource cost reduction to, I'd say, even like about 25% total, that's when you start seeing noticeable differences. And this works really, really well with spells that have very high resource cost. So if you're running a build where you're using, let's say, like Meteor, and it takes costs you 40 arcane power, well, just maxing this, it's going to drop it down to 36. It's going to reduce it by 4. So this is actually very substantial, and that's almost like having the storm armor, power of the storm, which reduces cost by 3 AP. So this is very, very good, and you're really just going to have to kind of juggle between these two and see which one you want to max. And of course, and these values, by the way, guys, these values change at 70. So at 70, it's not going to be 825 life on hit. It's actually like a really high amount. I don't know what it is. I saw it before on videos of people who got to play beta, but this is going to be a pretty high amount. So this, depending on which one you really need, like if you don't have a whole lot of sustain and you need a lot of sustain, then life on hit is probably going to be the first thing that you max. If you do, then if you don't have points to max both. If you do have enough sustain to kind of play at whatever level you're playing, then resource cost reduction first. It's going to be useful for absolutely everything, and then go life on hit, have at least 1 point in area damage, and gold find is last. So you would go max 1 if this was maxed, and then whatever else. But if let's say for certain builds, like for my build, I don't really need life on hit that much because I just don't have enough of it from items, and currently we're still playing at 60, so I actually still have my lifesteal weapon. So I'm doing resource cost reduction and trying to max out area damage for more total damage. But again, gold find absolute last. This is absolutely worthless. Hopefully in the near future this will be changed to either something else entirely, or it will be buffed in some way to actually make it useful. So now let's move on to the defensive tab. Hands down, resist all is the first thing, regardless of class, regardless of anything, well, almost anything, regardless of like 99% of things, resist all is going to be first. This will give you more mitigation than armor or life percentage. And so this will be the first one. And in most cases, because in 2.0, the vitality rolls just absurd amounts on gear, you're going to want life percentage is actually going to give you the second most amount of toughness. Now, armor is interesting because if you're a strength character, so barbarian or soon to be crusader, this at 1 point will actually give you roughly the same mitigation as resist all. So for strength-based classes, you may want to go all resist first, and then because the strength classes are going to lack all resist, so either way, all resist first and then armor and then life, but only if you have a lot of armor already. I would say somewhere in the 10,000 range would be where this starts to actually become competitive. Now there are situations where actually having lower life percentage but higher, like basically getting higher toughness through armor and resist all is better than getting higher toughness through life percentage, and that has to do with sustain. So if you're getting passive life regeneration, you're getting life on hit, if you have low armor, low all resist, but very high hit points, your sustain, your healing number, which is what Blizzard calls it, here, is actually becomes less effective because you have so many hit points, because so much of your toughness is derived from hit points and not armor resist, that every point of life is actually worth less, so your healing becomes less effective. So ideally you would actually go resist all and armor first, and then get life percentage. But until you gear up adequately, typically resist all followed by life percentage. And then life regeneration last. Now, this is very interesting because, and this again is a different number at level 70, but for certain builds that rely on high amounts of passive life regeneration, just for certain game mechanics, this is actually something you're going to want to max alongside all resist, maybe even first. This is kind of a niche build, but for example, I'm going to be releasing a video soon. I'm actually working on a barbarian who, once he gets kind of low on health, becomes almost invulnerable, and it's kind of based on a life per second passive regeneration build. So typically this is not something you'd put points in first, but if you have a specialty build that kind of revolves around specialty gear, then you will. Otherwise, this is probably going to be your last stat. You're going to go resist all first, and then depending on gear, either life or armor, but go ahead and just max one, and then life regeneration last. So, and I don't want to give out the surprise, prematurely, but again, in certain specialty builds, you will be doing life regeneration first, but very rarely. Long story short, resist all first, like 99.9% of the time. Now, offense. This is where it actually gets interesting. So, attack speed, crit chance, and crit damage are all pretty well balanced to like 1 point, like 0.2 attack speed is roughly equal to 0.1 crit chance, is roughly equal to 1% crit damage. So, and they're not exact numbers, it kind of depends on how much of each you have, but they're roughly equivalent. But in most cases, you're going to want to do crit chance first, and I'll explain why. I'll explain why crit chance first is better than attack speed and better than crit damage. So first, let's talk about crit chance and crit damage. So crit chance, by default, it's a chance to do 50% extra damage, blah, blah, further increased by skills. But this gives you a chance for more damage. If you go with crit damage first, you're increasing you're basically increasing the randomness factor in your damage output, because here you're actually reducing the randomness factor because you're getting a higher chance to hit for additional damage. But here your chance to hit for additional damage is still the same. You're just increasing the amount of damage that you hit for. That should make sense. So going for this first is actually worse than going crit chance first, because again you're basically increasing your randomness factor here, and you're increasing it the least here. Now, why would you not go for attack speed first? Because attack speed doesn't increase your randomness factor at all. This is attack speed is attack speed. You're always going to attack 10% faster. The reason that you don't really want to do this first in most builds is because most builds rely on a certain style of resource management. Barbarians are a little bit different, but most classes, we'll just use Wizard as an example, relies on, for the most part, a passively regenerated resource. And so, you only have a certain amount that you can spam. Like, I can only, spam, I should have done that. I can only spam a certain amount of orbs before my resource runs out and I have to wait for it to regenerate. So there's only a certain amount of burst damage that I can do before I have to wait. And, AP on crit is actually not, I'm not going to factor it in. I'm kind of making this video for ROS and not, level 62.0 because we're so close to it. But anyway, because, you can only burst damage so much before you run out of resources, you want each one of your spells, each one of your spell casts to do more damage. Well, if you go for attack speed first, your character sheet DPS is going to increase, but you're actually all you're doing is you're just draining your resources faster, and you are doing more damage per unit of time, but you're not doing more damage per amount of resources spent, if that makes sense. So, again, you want to maximize your damage per point of damaged resource, and to do that, the best way to do that is through crit chance. So I would recommend crit chance first in most builds, followed by crit damage, and then attack speed, and then cooldown reduction last. Now let's talk about a couple specialty builds. So in most builds, that's how you're going to go. You're going to go crit chance first, followed by crit damage, followed by attack speed, and cooldown reduction last. Let's talk about a couple specialty builds. So I know the Crusader has like a couple skills or something. I forgot the names of them. Haven't memorized them all yet. But there's one where like all your attacks basically crit. So if you're gonna go for like a cooldown reduction build where you try to have that up all the time, then you don't really need a lot of crit chance, because past a certain amount, like your crit chance is going to be wasted. So in a specialty build like that, you would want to go crit damage first. There are going to be builds that rely on hitting a certain attack speed per second breakpoints, where this will come in handy and you will do this first. But those are very special builds. Let's look at like Barbarian Hammer of the Ancients. It has a chance to crit, an additional chance to crit based on how much fury you have. Well, if you're kind of used to sitting around a certain amount of fury, then you can calculate and see how much crit chance do you really need. And if, like, let's say you're sitting on a 50% crit, and you're going to be like, you're basically going to figure out how much crit you need to basically crit 100% of the time with Hammer of the Ancients. And then if that doesn't require you to put 5 points of crit chance into here, then you would dump it into crit damage first. So there are situations where you do this first. Cooldown reduction, again, this I feel like is actually going to be used a lot, because there are certain classes, including the Crusader, who have a lot of potential, rotating spells and skills that have certain cooldowns. And cooldown reduction as a whole is going to play a huge role in Reaper of Souls. So I think actually for a lot of builds, as you kind of progress, depending on which way you decide to go, cooldown reduction may actually be the first thing that you put points into, followed by crit chance, then crit damage, and attack speed last. So I can see a scenario like this happening quite a bit, assuming that you stack other cooldown reduction gear. If you're just going for just a flat 10%, then don't do that. But if you're going to have a diamond in your helm and you have cooldown reduction on other pieces of gear, and maybe you have some weapon or something that reduces the cooldown of a certain skill by a certain amount, like the level 70 set for the Crusader reduces the cooldown of Akrat's Champion by 50%. Well, that's huge. And if you further stack cooldown reduction, you could have very high uptime on that ability, and that's a very powerful ability. So in those cases, cooldown reduction is going to be something you put points into first. So it's either going to go like this, or it's going to go crit chance, crit damage, attack speed, cooldown reduction last. With cooldown reduction as well as resource cost reduction, you typically kind of have to go all in, or like all or nothing, to get the most benefit out of them. So we'll go to the final tab now. Interesting thing here. So right now, at level 60, patch 2.0, gear still doesn't roll like really absurd amounts of primary stat and vitality, so it makes sense to pump, put a bunch of points into here. But in Reaper of Souls, 95 points is like, gear is going to roll, 700, 750 stats on a single item, so it would take you a lot of points to match even a single stat roll on a single item just through Paragon points alone. So primary stat and vitality and Reaper of Souls are actually, these are going to be your last ones. These are going to be way less useful than they are now. You're not going to actually put any points into this until you max these two. Here's why. Let's say you have boots, right? So I have these Sage's Journeys that I crafted, and I don't have move speed on them, you'll notice, and they roll all resist, armor, and then 4 properties, 2 of which are primary, 2 of which are secondary. So if I wanted move speed on here, let's say I wanted 12% move speed, then the only other primary, like, I wouldn't be able to roll int and vitality on it. I would only be able to get one of the two, because move speed is a primary roll. So I'd be giving up, a lot of stat points in this case. It's up to almost 350 stat points just for 12% move speed. So even at level 60, I'd be giving up 350 points. Now remember that for 12% move speed. Okay, in ROS, this is going to be like 700 plus for 12% move speed. Now let's see what 12% move speed looks like. 12% move speed is, well, it's actually 24 points. So let's do that again. 24 points is 12% move speed, right? Well, 24 points is only 120 stat. So what's larger, 120 or 750? Or whatever the numbers are. It depends on if you're getting rares, legendaries, set items, whatever. But the point is move speed. Getting maxed out move speed through Paragon points is a lot more valuable than getting it through items, because you're giving up a primary stat slot for move speed. So this is going to be the first thing you max. Absolutely. Once you get rid of your move speed items, or if you don't want to get rid of them, just re-roll that property if it doesn't come there, by default. Move speed first. Okay, max that. Then go for max resource. Again, this is a lot more valuable than primary or vitality, because 25 points in this will give you, or 50 points in this, it'll give you, in this case, like 25 max arcane power, right? Well, 50 points in int is going to give us 250 stats. So this 250 stats in ROS is going to be half of, it's going to be half to a third of one roll, because some items roll up to like 750 primary stat. So it's going to be a half to 1/3 of one stat roll on one item for 50 points. There are no items that give you, to my knowledge, that give you 25 AP. And typically they're somewhere in the up to 15, I believe, or so. So you're almost looking at 2 items or 2 secondary rolls on items to get 25 AP. That's 2 rolls versus 1/2 or 1/3 of a roll. So this is actually somewhere between, and my math may be off, but this is somewhere between 4 to 6 times more point efficient than either primary or vitality. So long story short, especially with ROS coming out, move speed first, max resource next. Or if you really need max resource first for some reason, you could. It definitely helps because it's going to let you burst more. But definitely go for these 2. And then in most cases, because vitality is going to be one of those things you get just enough of to make it. So pretty much all points, once these 2 are maxed, are going to go into your primary stat. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3. So there you go, guys. Hope you guys learned something new. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up if you like it. And I got the rest of my computer parts in, so new system coming soon. It will be here, be ready to roll before ROS, knock on wood. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.